This week on The Wheelhouse. Immigration enforcement. How are federal judges in Connecticut reacting to policy decisions from Trump 2.0? For Connecticut Public, I'm Frankie Graziano. This is The Wheelhouse. It's a show that connects politics to the people. We got your weekly dose of politics in Connecticut and beyond right here. Connecticut Governor Ned Lamont recently signed into law new protections for undocumented migrants. The bill seeks to keep ICE agents out of sensitive spots like churches and be identifiable by name or badge number. Connecticut's law comes as a rebuke to the Trump administration's aggressive immigration tactics, which have included thousands of arrests of immigrants. Many have been in the country for years and have no criminal records. But a new analysis from Politico has examined the legality of those arrests and found a staggering rate of rejections from federal judges. Joining us now to explain is Kyle Cheney, a senior legal affairs reporter at Politico. Kyle, thank you so much for coming on here.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you, and so interested to hear about your reporting in this database that you all have at Politico.com. We also want to hear from you folks. React to President Donald Trump's immigration policy by hitting us up on our YouTube stream or by giving us a call, 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. Kyle, talk about how you've seen the federal government's policy on immigration develop in the time since you've worked at Politico here.
Sure. So, I mean, one thing is just a very clear dividing line with the second Trump term. I mean, the first Trump administration, they pushed the envelope on immigration policy. They really tried to maximize deportations then, but there were certain lines they didn't cross and certain policies they didn't push to the maximum extent. I think some of that was due to Donald Trump's sort of newness to public life. He didn't put the people around him that would sort of pursue his instinct, his policies to the maximum extent. This term is very different. They're hitting the gas as much as possible and kind of daring the courts to keep up. In some ways, it's by design, and it has led to this enormous flood of legal battles over their policies, which again are much more draconian and aggressive than they were in the first term.
It started in earnest in January of 2025, and then immediately after being inaugurated, he made his policy agenda known on immigration. What was he saying in those first few days?
I mean, that was the flurry of executive orders that they were going to unleash ICE to the maximum extent possible. They were going to remove some of the guardrails and sort of checks within the department, within the agency, that were meant to limit enforcement operations, as you mentioned, at churches and schools and hospitals and sensitive locations. They were going to sort of make those easier. They were going to the maximum extent possible, pursue not only the deportation of people who are here illegally, but their detention as well. So holding as many people as possible in detention facilities as a way to sort of, deter or discourage people from remaining in the country.
Can you help us understand if there's a way to quantify or maybe comprehend whether or not this is something that's unprecedented from a president of the United States, these flurry of orders, this sort of executive action?
So,
related to immigration detention, sorry.
Right. Related to immigration detention, that's the key is, there's been some reporting that the deportation levels are actually have not reached the same levels that they were in the Obama era, that just simply is not been at that pace yet. The detention is a whole different story. They're detaining more people, I think, than ever before. They're needing to build, and they're running out of room in their facilities. And that's partly because of a sharp shift in policy that essentially treats everyone they find anywhere in the country as though they had just crossed the border, which were mandating their detention. And that has sort of led to this uptick in detentions all over the country.
Many of these ICE arrests and the subsequent detentions are challenged in federal court. You've examined thousands of these cases. Can you talk about what you found out?
Absolutely. And that's where our reporting comes in, is we started to see these legal battles emerge, and they've really exploded in the last few months. Tens of thousands of people filing what are called habeas petitions, saying they've been detained unlawfully for one reason or another. And the vast majority are suing over the fact that they have resided in this country for years. In some cases, they were even paroled in by a prior administration, and have committed no crimes, established roots, family members. Sometimes they have children who are citizens, and they're being detained. And the administration is saying, we're treating you as though you just crossed the border, which requires your detention. And no previous administration has ever done that before. And so that's, as a result, we're getting this flood of litigation, and the judges who are reviewing them are saying these are illegal detentions. There's a reason no other administration has done this before. It's because it's not legal.
I want you to help us understand here how many cases or so. I think 13,000 or something on the Politico website, and just kind of give us the numbers.
Yeah. So this is sort of what's remarkable. 13,000 is the rulings that we're tracking, and that's probably an undercount too. But 13,000 is the number of times courts have ruled whether or not a person's detention was illegal or not, whether they were deprived due process, either a bond hearing or outright release. And in about 11,000, actually almost 11,500 of those 13,000 rulings, the judges have agreed that the detention was illegal, or and deprived someone of due process. And so it's just overwhelming rejection. There's probably 30,000 cases in the system that are still pending, but of the ones that have been decided, it's overwhelming.
Is the administration being accused by anybody of intentionally flooding the courts? And if so, how are they responding?
Yeah, so look, I mean, when you ask, if you say we've lost 90% of cases, how are we doing? Most people would say that's not a very good rate. But if the administration's goal is not necessarily to win these cases, but to make life as difficult as possible for as many people as possible who they would like to see deported, then maybe that's a different metric. And I think the advocates for people who have been detained say that's the goal here. A lot of people are giving up. Even for all the rulings that are being won, there's many, many other cases where people are just folding and saying, I'm not going to sit in detention hoping I win my case. I'll pack up and I'll leave. I might be deported at the end of this process anyway. And so why fight? And I think there's a sense out there that that's the goal here. Make it as onerous as possible, maybe as a deterrent effect on people coming in the future, or maybe just encourages people who are here to leave.
And I think part of the response that they've had is they've issued some kind of guide for migrants or something like that you can sort of self-deport.
Yeah.
And you have some kind of incentive to do so.
Yeah, and they've even said outright, like, if you don't want to be detained, you might just leave, and then you won't be detained anymore. You can, and in fact, if you leave on a voluntary basis, we'll give you $1,000 to plan your travel, and you won't have a record against you if you ever try to come back in legally. And that's their sort of pitch on that. Even though many of these people are being detained in illegal ways and the courts are releasing them, they're saying, well, if you don't want to deal with that process, just go ahead and leave.
Can you give me a taste of the best response you've gotten so far, maybe from like an advocate or a lawmaker in your reporting so far? I think you've done like at least 5 or 6 stories on the database here since it's come out. Give us like some reaction to this flooding here of the courts.
Well, what we're seeing, what the responses we're getting, are people are sort of, and the reason we did this is people didn't really understand the scale. I think there's even judges in other districts didn't really understand quite how many of these cases and rulings there were, and what the rate of rejections has been. I think, there's been this concern. I mean, the cases have flooded the system. They've overwhelmed courthouses in multiple districts across the country, and judges have been frustrated, but I don't think they actually understood the magnitude. And so they're citing our database quite a bit. Some states are citing our database and saying you need to see like the raw number of these cases that are being rejected in court as illegal, because it puts it in a different perspective than just a handful here, a handful there. It's overwhelming.
Give us a call, 888-720-9677. If you'd like to talk to us on the Wheelhouse this morning, 888-720-9677. You could also send us an email. You could comment on our YouTube stream. We're live there. We're talking about state law versus federal law here. And you're talking about even some of these state lawmakers citing your reporting or something like that. You're saying that law enforcement at the federal level right now is detaining people almost certainly heading to the Supreme Court. Talk more about what you mean there.
So because of the, again, overwhelming is the word of the day, the crush of these cases, it's happening in every district in the country, and that's led to appeals. In some cases, the losing party is the government, or the person who is detained is appealing, and we've gotten appeals court battles in every district, every appeals court circuit in the country. 5 of those circuits have already ruled, and it's led to a division. There's been the 5th and 8th Circuit, considered the most conservative circuits in the country, have ruled in favor of the administration's detention policy, while 3 other circuits have ruled against them. That is a classic, like, tailor-made situation that's going to go to the Supreme Court. Everyone, including the judges and the lawyers, keep saying this is going to go to the Supreme Court. It's almost, nothing is ever certain, but they're as certain as they can be that that's going to happen.
Is there any indication of how the justices may react to this? I ask because I think this is a point we want to underscore. In your reporting, when we're talking about the 90% of decisions against the administration here, it's not just judges that were appointed by some Democratic president like a Biden or a Clinton or an Obama. These are also even Reagan appointees, Bush appointees that are ruling against this, maybe even some first-term Trump appointees.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because that, to me, is maybe the most important takeaway from what we've gathered is this is across ideological lines. This is not even close. I mean, now among Trump appointees, there is a divide. That's maybe but still the majority of Trump appointees who have ruled on this question have ruled against the administration. I think it's still something like 60-40. And that's the best result that Trump has had among judges appointed by a certain president. But it's overwhelming in terms of, again, Reagan, Bush 1, Bush 2, and even first-term Trump appointees have rejected this policy in large numbers.
We got some comments on YouTube and Facebook. Obviously, some people are, you said, ideological. Some people are against undocumented migrants leaving here in the first place, as I imagine that the administration is in their stated policy. One individual says to us on YouTube, why detain them, just deport them. Some folks are saying, why would states spend any money on undocumented migrants? I just saw that on Facebook. Mm-hmm. So help me understand how you all are what kind of rhetoric you're hearing from folks and how you might respond in terms of why this is an important thing for states to pay attention to here.
Sure. I mean, look, the Supreme Court has established that people, whether they're here legally or illegally, are entitled to some form of due process if they're being, before they can be deported. And now Congress has drawn lines. They said if you are a new arrival, if you just crossed the border and you're apprehended, you can be deported you can be detained and deported in a pretty expedited way. However, the law has always divided over people who have resided in the country, in the interior of the country, for a longer period of time. And that's really at the heart here, is that this administration wants to take those people who have long been treated differently under the law and at least given more opportunities to remain free in their communities, even if they're ultimately deported, and a chance to challenge those their deportation proceedings in a different way. And so this administration has said, well, we don't want them to have those same opportunities to challenge. We're just going to detain them. And the courts are saying that's the part that's illegal, the part that where we used to differentiate recent border crossers from people in the country. We're now going to treat them essentially the same. The
work that you've done on this is so extensive. That's why I'm so glad that you guys are on the show and we're talking about this. You mentioned earlier, when we're talking about the law favoring people that have been residing here for a long time and due process, many of these lawsuits, I'm going to underscore this again, and these decisions, these habeas filings here, these are folks that are saying we're not getting due process.
Exactly. They're people who.
Okay.
They're essentially saying, no due process. A lot of the judges are not ordering them released into the community. They're saying this person should at least get a bond hearing. They should be able to talk to an immigration judge and say, I am not dangerous. I'm going to attend my immigration proceedings. I might even be deported at the end of them. But in the meantime, am I going to sit in a detention facility, or am I going to be at home in my community with my family, working at my job? I don't have a criminal record. I'm not a danger. And that's really what's here. So judges are saying you at least get a bond hearing in a lot of these cases. And sometimes they're getting released on bond. Sometimes they're still being detained, but they have that opportunity to plead their case.
All right. So we go to Politico.com. We see this database. There's 13,000 something rulings in there. There's a nice graph. Things that people like me that are simple in nature like and will help them follow along. Maybe we take that late June siesta and we're on vacation for a little bit. When we come back on July 4th, what are you going to be following? after
Sure.
July 4th?
So we're going to be relaunching this database too, where you can actually link and see the judges' individual rulings, which I think is actually really useful to see in their own words, and they tell the stories of some of the
Wow.
people who've been detained. And I think there's some power to that, and it's helpful to understand who are the people who are being detained. By July 4th, I expect several more circuits will have ruled on this, and we may be on that path to the Supreme Court in a more clear way than I mentioned. So this is going to be with us for at least the next few months. This policy and this legal battle. And so I think we'll be approaching that Supreme Court moment right around then.
Kyle, so happy to have you on the Wheelhouse this morning. Again, folks can follow your work at Politico.com. Kyle Cheney, the senior legal affairs reporter with Politico. Thank you so much, and thank you for your database. Have a nice morning.
Thanks so much for having me.
After the break, we're going to get reaction from a former lawmaker in Connecticut. We'll also talk to Connecticut Public Latino Communities reporter Daniela Doncel about her coverage of undocumented migrants living in Connecticut. Got a question or comment? Hit us up. Comment on our YouTube live stream or give us a call, 888-720-9677. Let's work through some of these things together. You know, we're talking about things. We're asking you, how far should lawmakers go here in Connecticut? How far should federal lawmakers go when we're talking about undocumented migrants? Hit us up, 888-720-9677, or comment on our YouTube stream. There's more Wheelhouse right after this on Connecticut Public. This is the Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. We just heard about immigration policy within the Trump administration and arrests that are jamming up the federal court system. Now we're continuing the conversation by turning our attention to Connecticut. Joining us are Daniela Doncel, a Latino communities reporter at Connecticut Public. Daniela, thank you so much for coming on here.
Thank you for having me.
Making your return on the Wheelhouse. So excited to see you, and thank you so much for your reporting. Also with us this morning, Mike Lawler. There he is. I haven't seen you in so long besides Facebook. It's so good to see you. Back from a recent trip. He's the Associate Dean of the University of New Haven's Henry C. Lee College of Criminal Justice and Forensic Sciences. Also the former Undersecretary for Criminal Justice, Policy and Planning in Connecticut. Also a former state lawmaker in Connecticut as well, out of East Haven, I believe. Mike, thanks so much for being here.
Hey, good morning, Frankie.
Hey, good morning to you as well. Hey, folks, you got any thoughts on federal immigration policy, Connecticut's response? Let's have a conversation here today. Hit us up, comment on our YouTube live stream. Give us a call, 888-720-9677. Just share your thoughts, but just make sure you're sort of quick, you know, then we can talk about whatever. But in the last segment, we talked about federal judges ruling against ICE detentions in a big way. Mike, any reaction to what we just heard from Kyle?
Yeah, I mean, when you see the actual numbers, it's pretty amazing. But it's clearly part of a deliberate strategy to overwhelm the courts. And, you know, I think more broadly, I think the Trump administration strategy is to deter people from trying to enter the United States based on the fact that if they get here, there's just going to be a nightmare they have to contend with. And to some extent, I guess that's effective. Whether or not it's a good idea or appropriate policy, you know, we could talk about.
And the thing is, there's not a lot of nuance in this, right? I mean, the stated policy from the beginning is, and you'll hear Caroline Leavitt say it a lot in White House meetings. You'll hear come from Trump's mouth. They say that these undocumented migrants are here illegally, and many of them should be treated as criminals. That's sort of the stated position.
You know, originally, don't forget, during the campaign, especially, President Trump talked about targeting violent criminals, right? And we now know, you talk about statistics, we now know that less than 5% of all the people that they've grabbed off the streets have been convicted of a violent crime, and the vast majority have not been convicted of any crime. And, you know, so... And
some of them are U.S. citizens as well.
Well, yes, because, you know, the ICE folks are not the most highly trained crowd, that's for sure. I mean, they don't wear uniforms, they wear masks. There's a reason they have masks on. You know, it's really troubling if you care about law enforcement. You know, I work with local police a lot, and I think they feel embarrassed by the behavior of these newly hired ICE agents who, you know, it looks like the neighborhood gang has come together to advance this policy. So it has a lot of unintended consequences. It has some intended consequences. but it's just bad public policy.
And following up on what Mike said there is that we've talked with a lot of reporters in recent years and folks at the University of New Haven as well who pay attention to criminal justice. When you're talking about crowd control, when you're talking about people maybe protesting ICE action or something like that, what's preferred, at least, particularly by state officials, is that you would have local law enforcement dealing with some kind of a protest or some kind of a protest against ICE action, rather than National Guard troops or like ICE enforcement officials kind of dealing and doing crowd control. Yeah,
I mean, police officers, especially here in Connecticut, are specifically trained in de-escalation, right? That's the goal. By watching the way ICE conducts itself on the streets of our cities, it looks like they're trained, and it's pretty clear they are trained in escalation. I mean, these confrontations where they're giving contradictory orders to people. Let me see your hands and show me your driver's license or get out of the car. And people get confused, and that creates a problem. Not to mention just the verbal back and forth between the ICE agents and the protesters. I mean, you wouldn't see this from real police here in Connecticut, certainly.
In Connecticut, lawmakers have passed, and the governor has now signed into law, legislation in May that seeks to curb ICE's presence in the state. It's called an Act Concerning Democracy and Government Accountability. Can you talk a bit about the new law here, Mike?
Yeah, so this is building upon prior iterations, which date back almost 15 years now in our state, where we're trying to figure out the extent to which Connecticut and our law enforcement officers should be involved in immigration enforcement, right? The most recent version, to me, like the most significant aspect of it is it gives people a right of private action. They can sue a federal officer for violating their constitutional rights. They can sue in state court. And that is significant, right? And it'll take time for this to play out. There will come a time when we will know the identity of all of the federal officers, notwithstanding their masks, a future it's all public record, right? Names of federal officers. They're obscured now. At some point in the future, we'll be able to go back and find out the names of everybody who was involved in each of these operations. And we've got the advantage of video. And so there will be people held accountable down the road, personally and criminally, for their behavior. That's a very significant change. The other change in here is, building upon prior efforts to delineate where this enforcement action should be happening. So not in schools, not in churches, not in hospitals, not in courthouses, sensitive locations. The problem is, even though a federal officer might be violating one of these laws, which might technically be a crime or a contempt of court, do we expect local police to take these federal officers into custody? Because if they did that, then they could be charged with interfering with federal officers, which is a federal crime. So this is a dilemma that is confronting us now. It's completely unnecessary, and without digressing too much. And I think the ultimate solution to this huge problem is to reboot the entirety of U.S. immigration policy. And, it is worth noting that in the pre-MAGA era, back when the GOP was the GOP, there was a proposal in Congress to completely reboot immigration policy, spearheaded by, of all people, Marco Rubio, right? It had bipartisan support, and it was killed by the House Republicans at the time in Congress, right? And if that bill had passed, we would not be seeing the problems we're having now. We would have a much better managed immigration process. People who had been here for years would have had a path to citizenship. And I think it would make a lot of sense, and it would make America great again, because back in the good old days when America was great, immigration was much different than it is today in terms of the regulatory oversight of the procedures, it's almost impossible now to legally come to the United States as an ordinary immigrant. So
You've talked about people covering their faces. As face masks, can you wear a face mask anymore if you're a federal law enforcement, or at least is this addressed in the law?
Yeah, well, it's unlawful in the law, but the question is, the challenge for local law enforcement here is, are we going to arrest these guys, right? And because the minute you try to, I'm sure in response, the local officers would get arrested. And, people argue that that federal officers are immune because they're federal government officials that they can't be prosecuted in state courts. That's actually not true. We've seen a couple of federal officers in Minnesota be charged in the murders involving the folks that got shot and killed out there. So it's complicated. The procedures that govern the process are somewhat unique. But yeah, you can be charged with a crime if you break a criminal law. Even though you're a federal officer, you can be prosecuted in state court.
We talk about face coverings. We're even talking about now we're going to go into why you paid attention to this when you were a lawmaker here in Connecticut. There's sort of this air of mystery, this cover of darkness in terms of ICE action here in Connecticut and beyond. So let's talk about ICE detainers, and that's kind of where this all gets carried out and why the state is trying to prevent certain arrests. What's an ICE detainer, and why might state officials be concerned about them?
So ICE detainers are simply a request from ICE, which is part of Homeland Security, to hold a person who's already in custody, let's say in a local police station or one of our Department of Correction facilities. It's simply, picture just a fax or an email saying, hey, you've got this guy in custody, hold him for us and don't release him. Notify us and give us 48 hours to come and take the person into custody, right? So that's an ICE detainer. What it's not a warrant signed by a judge. It's a big difference. And so this all began as a real, ICE detainers have always existed, but in 2011, 2012, 2013, the frequency of these detainers being issued really escalated. And for those of you who pay attention to the political timeline, those dates I just mentioned were during the Obama administration.
I was going to say, this predates Trump in Connecticut, where you have a situation where Democratic lawmakers targeted at least the way that the administration was handling these detainers. So this is something that happens before Trump.
Yes, it definitely happened. Actually, without going into a lot of boring detail, I'll try and make it simple here.
Yes, please do.
There's a federal initiative called Secure Communities, which was initiated at the very end of President Bush's administration in 2008. President Obama comes into office. They start this policy starts to be implemented. It's pretty technical, right? It simply says that the FBI will share fingerprint information with Homeland Security, because when somebody gets arrested anywhere in the country, typically they're fingerprinted. Those fingerprints are electronically transmitted to the FBI, and the FBI has them, so they know people are getting arrested in real time anywhere in the country. It makes perfect sense because the New Haven Police Department wants to know the guy we just arrested, is he really who he says he is? Does he have any warrants elsewhere in the country? That type of thing. FBI began to share that, give access to that database to ICE. And so ICE would also find out everybody who's arrested anywhere in the country in real time. And that would allow them to issue a detainer request to a police department or a jail somewhere in the country saying, hey, you've got this guy, don't release him, hold him for us, let us know, and we'll be there within 48 hours, right? So those are detainer requests. And the problem that emerged here in Connecticut back in 2012, 2013, is that people became aware that if you get arrested, ICE is going to find out about it in real time. And the concern that we had, and this is when I was working for Governor Malloy, the concern we had is if our large immigrant communities in Connecticut, whether they're here legally or not, whether they're citizens or not, are going to be reluctant to reach out to the local police as a victim or as a witness for fear that that would also bring in the immigration police. And, many people have relatives or housemates or significant others or parent who may not be properly documented. And so they wouldn't call. And if people don't trust the police, don't call the police to report crimes, then crime will go up. And our goal was to have less crime. And so we felt that we needed to make a clear statement that calling the local police in Connecticut is not the same as reaching out to the federal immigration police. We wanted to have a clear distinction. And that distinction has grown over time, but that's where it all comes from. And it's worth noting that the law that led to this, the original Trust Act, was passed unanimously in both houses of the Connecticut legislature, in the Senate and the House. Every single Republican, every single Democrat voted for it. And it's become a partisan issue more recently, but back when Obama was president, apparently the Republicans were happy to vote for it, including some of the primary leaders in the state house today, Republican leaders, also voted for it.
This is a bipartisan effort to tackle crime, really, in Connecticut when you all did it. But
It was, yeah.
there's crime there, but there's also this image, and I don't mean to play into stereotypes here, but I'm feeling that you all are doing this because you're worried about the desk cop at like 2:30 in the morning being the arbiter of who's going to be fulfilled in a detainer request versus due process, right? Is that like the concern that you guys have, that somebody somewhere is going to be deciding on a case here and getting ICE involved rather than some kind of due process?
Yeah, these detainer requests are just issued by some random bureaucrat at ICE, right? Who knows? And it's been the case that they've issued these against people who actually are citizens too. I mean, there's not a whole lot of oversight here. A lot of names are very similar, including people's dates of birth and stuff. So it's fraught with potential errors, and it's overbroad, obviously. And so our argument to ICE was, hey, if there's some serious criminal that you feel the need to take him into custody, go get a warrant signed by a judge, right? I mean, police do this every single day. It's not like complicated. It's just a little bit more effort than sending an email at 2 o'clock in the morning. And by the way, when this was going on, we said, it's public record who's in our custody. Why don't you just monitor it and then come and pick the guy up when he gets released? And they literally said, this is the ICE folks back in 2013, 14. They said, well, our people don't work on weekends. So that's not our problem. That's your problem. If this is such a big priority, then figure out a way to do this. It's very public. We're just not going to help you. That's all.
So we talked about all of this. Let's button it up here, but it leads to the Trust Act in Connecticut, all this work that you're doing in 2013. So what did y'all do?
So the Trust
Act, and it
Act
got passed, as you said, unanimously, but what did it do, the law?
Yeah, so the original version from 2013 said that, we will not hold people beyond the time, if they're post bond or their sentence is over, they're going to be released. And we're not going to hold them an extra 48 hours based on a detainer, right? There's Fourth Amendment issues in there too. And so that's basically what it said. Over time, there was a concern that, maybe a law enforcement agency, probation, prosecutors, corrections would be on their own reaching out to ICE. So then it was clarified that, you can't, we added to the list of law enforcement officials who are not allowed to reach out to ICE and sort of dime people out. And then ultimately we said that no state resources can be expended to assist ICE in enforcing federal immigration law. This did progress over time. Initially, it was just to say, we're not going to honor these ICE detainers. You want to get the guy, either get a warrant or be there when he gets released. And there are exceptions. It's important to point out there are exceptions for people convicted of serious violent crimes. People are on the terrorist watch list. What we found out, people getting arrested for minor sort of domestic violence stuff, shoplifting, drunk driving. These people are all of a sudden finding themselves in ICE detention and being deported, leaving behind their families in many cases. And just think of it for a second. If you are the spouse of somebody who is undocumented and there's a domestic violence incident that would lead to an arrest, you're not going to call the police because you don't want even though you're in an argument, you don't want your significant other to be deported because he might be the breadwinner of the family. And it's this kind of thing that the local police reported to us as a problem.
But it sounds like you're kind of pushing back against the notion that violent criminals, violent undocumented migrants, if they are in this country, you're sort of pushing back and saying that no one's really protecting them, as somebody might assert.
Right. Our law explicitly takes them out of the, they're not protected by anything in the Trust Act. That's for sure. Right. And so, I mean, there are some people who need to be incarcerated, and there's some people who need to be removed from the country. It is worth noting, as someone who pays a lot of attention to the criminal justice system, that someone who commits a serious violent crime in Connecticut should be locked up as a prisoner for a long time in Connecticut. They shouldn't be sent back to their home country where they're going to be free with the possibility of re-entering the United States. I mean, it's crazy, right? And so we think our policy works. It does not violate any federal law. Interestingly, when Trump came into office the first time, he said that Connecticut was a sanctuary state and we were violating federal law and he was going to withhold all our grants. And, fast forward a little bit, Jeff Sessions, who at the time was Trump's attorney general, said, "Congratulations, Connecticut, for following federal law, because nothing we do violates federal law."
He said that, but he didn't say that at first, did he? Or at least policy, or
No, of
what
course
you
not,
all were
but-
dealing with? Yes.
Right, we push back. It's like,
Yeah.
you tell us which federal law you claim we're violating, and of course we're not. And tell us what you mean by sanctuary state. They couldn't define that. So I mean, obviously there's a lot of politics involved here. It's a lot of anti-immigrant bigotry, which has got a long history in this country. You know, my ancestors came here from Ireland in the 1850s and 60s. They were on the receiving end of the same kind of stuff. So it's different now. Because it could be more the technical machinery to do this stuff is more elaborate than it used to be.
Mike, I got to bring in Daniela in a second. Before I do that, I just want you to get to kind of what you're alluding to, which is that in 2019, I think there's some changes or at least some updates to the Trust Act in Connecticut.
There was each year that went by, it was possible to identify, in essence, loopholes in the Trust Act. So it was expanded from the original version, which passed unanimously, 2019. Now Trump is in office. This is where it's legislated that you cannot expend any state resources to enforce immigration law, with a couple of narrow exceptions. And now, more recently, in the last couple of years, you see additions that basically govern how ICE can conduct themselves in the state. For example, no masks and that type of thing.
And technically, this year's law, Daniela, in 2026, the one that passes, is not an update to the Trust Act. We know that several of these laws have been iterations that have built upon it. This does sort of in nature, the one that passed this year. Last year, there were actual updates to the Trust Act that you all covered?
Yeah, there was. And we saw, I think Mike covered it beautifully in the idea that it's been just a lot of expanding of this Trust Act to make sure that it's covering all those loopholes. It says like no state resources are allowed to be used for ICE enforcement activity. That includes now, it's been expanded, so now all state municipal employees and criminal prosecutors are within this law. They cannot comply, for example. He mentioned you can now file a lawsuit if any police department, for example, or any town is, violating the Trust Act in any way. And we'll see that throughout the years, see how that plays out. And this was significant because before there was no real penalty if police violated the Trust Act. So that was a really big change. And also on the flip side, there were more crimes that were added to the Trust Act. Violent crimes, things that Connecticut Republicans really wanted to see added to make sure that they were not that law enforcement could comply with detainers in terms of these specific people regarding these specific crimes.
Hey, you're talking to advocates. What are they saying about policy and the need to update state laws in response to these sort of aggressive immigration tactics of the second Trump administration, now that we're talking about Trump 2.0?
Yeah, one of the biggest things that they wanted was protections around courthouses. A lot of advocates were seeing that courthouses were a big place for ICE agents to be at and to kind of monitor. So they really wanted these protections, which they saw. Last year, lawmakers did pass laws that ensured that there were no arrests being taken place inside or around courthouses after seeing actual instances of that happening. But they want more, right? They want to make sure that there are other protections in place around courthouses. So, for example, making sure that people can do virtual court proceedings and hearings, the same way that was done during COVID, right? To allow people who are fearful of going to these places to be able to do that in that capacity, for example. We also have the issue of automated plate recognition systems. They want to make sure that, government enforcement agencies can't use those to track vehicles in the capacity of ICE agents, for example. And they also just want to see increased support, right? Affordable housing, affordable health care, child care, just anything that can help even ease the daily lives of immigrants within our state. They want to, because these are people that are facing these fears and facing these, situations in which they don't know if they can even leave their home. So
who are you meeting out in the field that's fighting for migrants? Who are the players nowadays? And what are they saying about their work?
So we meet with a lot of different groups, Make the Road Connecticut, Unidad Latina de Acción in New Haven, Harvard Deportation Defense, Danbury Unites for Immigrants. There's a lot of really great immigrant-led groups across the state that are doing a lot of great work. And from speaking with some of the members of these groups, a lot of what they're saying is, the work is honestly getting tougher, right? There's a lot that is still needed. There was a lot of great support when it comes to rallies and protests and gatherings. But when it comes to a lot of the behind the scenes things, right? So actually helping out these families, rapid response teams, that kind of thing, they need more volunteers and they need more funding as well.
I talked to Mike earlier about now the specter of National Guard officers or federal law enforcement potentially being at some of these events. So is that a concern that people have, that they're sort of dealing with people that could potentially escalate a crowd?
It's definitely a concern, though it's not something that I'm hearing too much within these circles. It's not something that we see in Connecticut often, right? But even earlier this year, we did see an instance where there was an encounter with ICE during one of these protests right here in Hartford, where unfortunately there was a pepper spray incident. And that was something that people still talk about and are kind of cognizant of when they go to new gatherings for these types of things. So I think it's something that's in the back of people's minds at the very least.
I'm going to have you and Mike stay with us after this segment. Before I go to break, I just want to remark on one of the stories that you had where in this time where a lot of people are focusing on language like don't fight back when you're in a protest or something like that, or know your rights and things like that. And it's a particularly tough time, as you said, that people are saying that the work is tougher. Joy is something that you've covered, and that's part of the mission here for advocates. How are they mixing in an element of fun in this work at a time that's so serious?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, every conversation I've had with an advocate, joy always comes up because this is not a 9-to-5, right? This is a work that happens throughout the day where people are constantly kind of on call, making sure that when something happens, they're there. I recently covered a photo exhibit from a youth committee with Hartford Deportation Defense where they were kind of highlighting the long 10-year history of this organization. And many of the photos were of very difficult times, but many of the photos were of joy, of people dancing, doing activities together, spending time in community. When I talked to the photographer of the exhibit, Adrian Montoro, he told me, it was very important to him to make sure that joy was part of this exhibit as well, to show that people are still making sure that during these difficult times, joy is never being deprioritized or put in the back burner.
From Connecticut Public, this is The Wheelhouse. I'm Frankie Graziano. You're listening to Connecticut Public reporter Daniela Doncel and former state lawmaker Mike Lawler. The pair are with us to talk about rights extended to undocumented migrants living in Connecticut. After the break, we're going to talk about a new law passed in Connecticut extending the protections migrants are offered here. Questions on what you heard this far, hit us up. Don't go anywhere. There's more Wheelhouse next on Connecticut Public. This is The Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. We're talking about immigration reform efforts in Connecticut this week. Next week, stay tuned. We're going to dig into the economy and how local communities are responding to rising costs this summer. As we continue today's show, still with us to talk about rights extended to undocumented migrants living here in Connecticut. Daniela Doncel is a Latino communities reporter at Connecticut Public. Thank you so much for being here, Daniela. And Mike Lawler, Associate Dean of the University of New Haven's Henry C. Lee College of Criminal Justice and Forensic Sciences. We're going to do this in 4 or 5 minutes here. I got a few questions for you all here, but story that our colleague Rachel Iacovone wrote about a Bridgeport father and son who were stopped by federal immigration officials on the way to school. What can you tell us about this case and why it's important in the context of what we're talking about today?
Yeah, absolutely. So Rachel covered this story. It was a case of a 16-year-old son and his father. They were in the car waiting for a school bus on a Friday morning when ICE officers came to detain the father, essentially. From a ICE spokesperson, we did learn that they were there to arrest the father due to they had a warrant for his arrest because of the fact that he had entered the country illegally back in 2005 and was ordered to leave the country. And that officers were there to make sure that not only he was taken, but that the son was given a chance to go home with the mother. So they gave the father a chance to call the mom, make sure she can come, grab the kid, but then he was taken. But at the same time, there was a great community support around this. The representatives, Rosario was able to contact Senator Richard Blumenthal to see what next steps could be taken. Make the Road sent out their rapid response team to go out there to provide support for the family. But really what this did was highlight a situation that was already happening in the city of Bridgeport, which was that there's a big uptick, essentially, in ICE enforcement there.
And something that you're talking about is the support that people might have in the community. You also introduced us, you and your reporting introduced us to Rehan in Cheshire. Yes,
Rehan was a very incredible case in the sense that this was something that was shocking. So Rehan is a teen who was taken unannounced. There was no announcement of this happening. He was taken while he was in his uncle's car, and he was held in detention in Massachusetts for a couple of weeks. The crazy thing about him that I think is most important to know is that his family is here under humanitarian parole. So they're here legally. There's no reason for him to be taken. And the reason they're under parole is because of his father. His father worked as an interpreter for the U.S. Armed Forces. And his father, years back, also was taken by ICE at one point. So it was a lot of people were saying, this family's being targeted. Why are they being targeted? Thankfully, we did get to see Rehan come home. But it was a shocking situation in which we are seeing this taking place, even for people who are here with documentation.
He remained in detention for like 2 weeks.
Yes.
Some people pointed out, I think it was Attorney General William Tong that said that was relatively short. Some people are held for months. Why did we see sort of this difference in this case?
The thing is that immigration law just in general is very, very complicated. So everything is kind of on a case-by-case basis. With someone like Rehan, he had a lot of outpouring support, a lot of high-profile individuals that were kind of helping his case. And the attorney that he has was able to kind of use, based on his situation, basically was able to get him into a court hearing that would allow him to leave the detention facility. However, to be very clear, this does not mean that he is, he's in the clear, essentially. Yes. He was released on bond, but he is still kind of in these removal proceedings by the United States to be...
Despite the administrative error.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So there's still a long way to go for him, but at the very least, he can be home while these proceedings are happening.
I want you to pay attention to Daniela's reporting. I can't ask her any more questions. We're out of time here. I want to ask Mike one more before we go, but... You all are doing a documentary, as I understand it.
Yes.
Can't tell us much about it, but I know that it's coming up.
It is coming. We're working on a mini documentary looking specifically at how ICE is impacting Connecticut youth. So you can keep an eye out for it. It's hopefully coming out
ctpublic.org.
Absolutely.
SCOTUS season, Mike. We know the decisions may come down this month, as they generally do, and we don't know when, but they will at some point. We talked earlier today about how this will... in the words of Politico reporter Kyle Cheney, almost certainly come up in the Supreme Court, dozens of cases for justices to rule on, and reports saying that President Trump's executive order denying birthright citizenship to children born from undocumented migrants will get a ruling. What are you hearing? What are you paying attention to, at least?
So I think any ruling from the Supreme Court is going to be pretty narrow and technical. They're not going to say that President Trump can't do anything he's doing. The issue about the birthright citizenship, the Constitution is absolutely clear on this. Should the Supreme Court rule the other way, which seems unlikely, it would be like, and then all bets are off, I think. But, and I want to say one thing, Frankie, though, I'm actually a little bit optimistic, because if you look at the public opinion polls, the way people view now what the Trump administration has done with immigration enforcement, it's extremely unpopular, especially among certainly Democrats, but also unaffiliated voters. I think this is helping to build the case for comprehensive immigration reform once the Trump administration comes to an end and the Congress changes over. I'm actually optimistic we'll get beyond this.
You've been listening to Mike Lawler, the Associate Dean of the Henry C. Lee College of Criminal Justice and Forensic Sciences at the University of New Haven. Thank you so much, Mike.
Anytime, Frankie.
Thank you to Daniela covering Latino communities in Connecticut. Catch her work at ctpublic.org. That's it for this week's show. Don't miss next week's show as we discuss the economy, politics, and the local reaction to rising costs in Connecticut. Thank you to Chloe Wynn, Patrick Scahill, Dylan Reyes, and the rest of the team. This is The Wheelhouse. I'm Frankie Graziano. Thank you.